This video will help you decide which 529 plan type you should use. If you don't know who I am, my name is Chris Dime. I'm a financial planner out of Edmonds, Washington, and I specialize in working with folks to and through retirement. Growing in popularity over the past couple decades has been planning for expected college expenses. One of the most popular vehicles to make that happen is the use of a 529 plan. And so in today's video, I thought it'd be helpful to break down the two main types of 529 plans to help you make an informed decision as to which account you should prioritize saving into if funding a college plan is a priority for you. So let's jump in. So if you're unfamiliar, the IRS breaks down 529 plans into two main types. There are prepaid tuition plans as well as college savings plans, also known as kind of investment-oriented 529 plans. There's other ways to save for education through the use of like a UTMA or a Coverdell, also known as like an ESA. But quite frankly, Coverdells are totally going the way of the dodo bird. They're sort of an outdated way of saving for education, and there's no real benefit to using them. There's really only downsides, and the downsides are very low annual contribution limits to the account. Back in the day, this was really the only way to save for private school for K through 12. But as you'll see in a minute, 529 plans can be used for that as well. So there's not really an advantage to using a Coverdell. If you are curious as to how to actually logistically go about using the money in your 529 plan and which expenses do or don't qualify, I'll link above to my previous video here that breaks down how to actually use the money in your 529 plan. First, let's touch on prepaid tuition plans. At a high level, these types of plans allow you to pre-purchase units to be used towards education expenses when your kiddo is eventually ready to go to school. You're locking in the price for each unit today because it's expected that the price for each unit will be much higher in the future. I think there's only like 12 states that actually offer prepaid tuition plans, and we'll get into this when we touch on some pros and cons, but if your state does not offer a prepaid tuition plan, that doesn't mean you can't use another state's prepaid tuition plan, but there's no guarantee that it will work, and so it can present some challenges relative to flexibility. For those of you in Washington State, the Washington prepaid tuition plan is called the GET program, or Guaranteed Education Tuition Plan. For the GET program, 100 units buys one annual tuition payment, and with each unit costing about $123.76 as of 2024, if you multiply 123.76 times 100, you get the exact cost of tuition for the calendar year of 2024. If you go to the UW website, it's a little bit higher now because it's showing you the 2024 to 2025 tuition rates. Theoretically, every year the price for tuition for University of Washington or an in-state public school goes up, so your units are pre-purchasing the cost today. I think of all the money that's in 529 plans in general, there's only about like 6% of the total market share that uses prepaid tuition plans. And to keep it super simple, if you like safety and the guarantees that the money you used will for sure be able to buy education expenses, whatever they turn out to be in the future, a prepaid tuition plan is a great option for you. The other type of 529 plan that I just call investment-oriented 529 plans are called college savings plans. And I think this is what most people are thinking about when they think about funding a 529 plan. It's basically an investment account that eventually you're going to use for education purposes. Same tax benefits as the prepaid tuition plan. Money goes in after taxes. Money grows in value inside the account without taxes. And then eventually when you want to spend that money on qualified education expenses, all that money gets to come out tax-free. Now, unlike a prepaid tuition plan whereby the state is guaranteeing the units you buy will be worth exactly one unit in the future as well, whatever the price per unit inflates to be, an investment-oriented 529 plan does not have any such guarantees. Now, there might be some guarantees inherent in the individual investments you select within the 529 plan, but philosophically, the investment-oriented 529 plan is not guaranteed to appreciate or go down in value, whatever. At the end of the day, it's basically another investment account, and you are responsible for the investment selection of said investment account. Now, while you might have to stomach some volatility for this, on average, if the markets do about 8 to 10%, then that would be your perceived reward for investing mostly in stock-oriented stuff inside these accounts. And generally, the investment custodian will kind of spoon feed you the target date portfolio that gets more conservative as your kiddo gets older and is expected to be using these funds when they enter kind of college age. From a personal bias standpoint, this is the type of 529 plan I have for my kids. All right, let's touch on some of the pros and cons. First up, prepaid tuition plans. The main pro of this type of account is the guarantees. It's guaranteed that the unit you buy today will be worth exactly 1 unit, however many years in the future. The state guarantees your purchasing power won't go away, and that's pretty attractive, especially maybe to older investors who have seen the cost of education rise dramatically over the past few decades. These plans delegate all investment opportunity to the institution that you're buying the units from, and essentially it's on them to make a return on the money you give them. You're abdicating all the investment responsibility to them, and in return, you're getting guarantees that the units you buy will be worth the exact same number of units in the future. It's very set it and forget it, and I think that's attractive. Now let's touch on the cons of these types of plans. Well, first and foremost, we touched on this earlier, you can't use a prepaid tuition plan everywhere necessarily. So if you have a prepaid tuition plan in Washington state, there's no guarantee that you'll be able to use that GET program or prepaid tuition plan for Washington state at other institutions throughout the globe. I actually have a client that's running through this exact issue. They have GET money with Washington state, but their daughter has fallen in love with the university that's closer on the East Coast, and they're having some issues getting their units to transfer effectively. I think the university is essentially going to give them like a reduced value for the units to apply towards their tuition. Out of state, different state, etc. Another huge con is the value of your units maintaining their purchasing power, while attractive, is not that attractive, especially in a state like Washington state. I'll link below to the RCW on this, but essentially in-state public school tuition increases are limited to the average increase in wages in Washington state. And if we use historical inflation as an example, not so much the past couple years, but if we assume that average wages went up by about 3%, well then public school tuition will only be going up by 3% as well. There's essentially a cap on how much tuition can increase relative to wages. Now, why is that a bad thing? Well, I guess it's a good thing that we know tuition rates increases will not get completely out of hand. It's a bad news for investors in prepaid tuition plans because if average inflation is 3%, average wage increase is about 3%, well then average tuition increase is going to be about 3%. Therefore, the investment rate of return on the money you're dumping into all these units is only compounding at 3% a year, which in the grand scheme of things is a terrible long-term investment rate of return. In addition, there are some maximums. You're only allowed to buy 8 years worth of tuition or 800 credits, at least for the Washington State GET program. And for those of you who might want to accumulate more for your particular beneficiary, well then you're going to be capped out. Now let's touch on some of the pros and cons relative to college savings plans or investment-oriented 529 plans. Some of the pros, every single state offers a 529 plan that you can take advantage of for your individual state. The nice thing is, other than states with a state income tax deduction on funding a 529 plan, is you can use any state's 529 plan and it all works for every other state. It doesn't matter if you're in Washington state and you use the Virginia state 529 plan. And that's another one of the pros is that you have the pick of the litter relative to various investment custodians. So if you love Fidelity, well, I think you might be more attracted to like the Colorado State 529 plan. I think they use Fidelity. Whereas if you prefer American funds, you might use the Virginia State. If you like the Hartford, then I think you would use West Virginia, if I remember correctly. Essentially, you've got lots of different options. Now, to clarify once more, though, if your state has a state income tax and permits a state income tax deduction on funding a 529 plan, well, then you'll have to use your state's 529 plan. But again, not that big of an issue because pretty much every 529 plan is the exact same. You put money in, you have a suite of investment options, most of which are target date funds relative to the age of your kiddo, and eventually you can use the money for college expenses in the future. In addition, some of the pros, although we'll touch on some cons, which is your responsibility for managing the investments, from a pro standpoint, you have lots of flexibility in what you want to choose to invest into. In addition, you don't need some third-party advisor relative to running a 529 plan. Now, I might recommend that if, for example, you're already working with someone and they offer this as part of their service. You could absolutely use an advisor, and a lot of advisors have what are called no-fee 529 plans. Now, be careful because if this is all that they're doing for you, odds are they're charging you some other way because nobody really wants to work for free. But as long as they're getting compensated fairly, they do not have to charge any sort of commissions nowadays on 529 plans. Of course, depending on the institutions they affiliate with. That no fee 529 may or may not be permitted. Generally, if your advisor is going to work at a large bank or a insurance brokerage firm or something like that, they're going to have to use a commission-based 529 plan, and we'll touch on that in some of the cons. But if they run their own RIA, for example, registered investment advisor, then a lot of times they'll have the flexibility to simply do a no-fee 529 plan. The pros with this account is if you invest it well, even if you simply bow down to the target date funds that are available, you'll on average return way higher than 3% for the longevity of this account. So in that regard, this blows the prepaid tuition plans out of the water. Unless you live in a state where public school tuition goes up faster than 8, 9, 10%, which would be wild over the next 20 years. Some of the pros too is that there's no technical maximum to funding a 529 plan. The IRS has some limits that say your state might impose a, hey, this is enough into a particular 529 plan. And I think that range last time I saw it was like somewhere in the ballpark of like 230 grand to like 575,000 bucks. So wide range. You'd probably have to check with your state's plan, or at least the state that the plan you're investing into is run by, to see what the maximums are. But in my opinion, it's a lot more flexible when it comes to making massive lump sums into the plan. Keeping in mind, and we'll touch on this in a future video, you could always split the 529 in between your 2 kiddos, or split it 3 ways between 3 kiddos, or cascade it down generations if your kids don't need all the 529 money. Lots of different options. Some of the big cons, number one, is that the growth of the account is your responsibility or your advisor's. But ultimately, the responsibility is not on some government institution which is providing guarantees. We touched on this earlier, but another con is a lot of these 529 plans are run in a legacy fashion, which are more of a commission-based fashion, which up until 3, 4, 5 years ago, was kind of how 100% of these 529 plans were run, which were on a commission basis, either through A shares or C shares. A shares would be, hey, here's 100 grand into this 529 plan, and the advisor would have to charge a 5% upfront commission. So that 5% fee on 100 grand is 5 grand, meaning you put 100 grand into the 529 plan, and the next day you have a $95,000 starting balance, and the advisor has a plus $5,000 commission check for the year. The other type of share class would be what's called a C share. And a C share, rather than charging an upfront load, charges a much higher annual maintenance fee of about 1 to 1.5%. So on a $100,000 account, that advisor would be getting paid about $1,000 every year. And of course, as the account grows and compounds, that $1,000 grows as well in proportion to 1 to 1.5% of the account. Now, while I don't fundamentally believe commissions are a bad thing, for a lot of customers, they may or may not be aware that their advisor was getting compensated. And what's worse, if the advisor, even benevolently, is recommending an investment change to the portfolio, that could come with a new A-share commission pop of 5% on however much money is getting moved over there. It sort of makes recommending trading decisions hard to decipher from a fiduciary capacity. So that's why you're kind of seeing a migration in the industry towards the no-fee 529 plans, just to avoid that sort of commission environment and move more towards a fiduciary objective recommendation style. And the last biggest con we touched on earlier is that since the investment selection is up to you, you better hope that your average return in the portfolio exceeds the increase in tuition prices on an annual basis. Now on Excel, the math always works out to use the investment-oriented 529 plan, unless you're going to invest your 529 plan into cash, at which point, yeah, do the prepaid tuition plan, but I think it'd be kind of silly to do that. So 9 times out of 10, using reasonable assumptions on Excel, the investment-oriented 529 plan crushes the prepaid tuition plan. And again, bias, the investment-oriented 529 plan is the type that I use for my kids. Okay, so from a calls to action standpoint, if funding a 529 plan is a high priority for you and your family, at least now or moving forward, I'd highly recommend giving this some prayerful thought on the pros and cons before you just start stroking checks to each type of plan. Of course, you should never be locked into either one of these options, but knowing human nature, once we make a decision, it's not usually the most comfortable thing to start having cognitive dissonance and second guessing our decision. So think about it, make an informed decision, and then pull the trigger. If you have further questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. And I would actually find it super valuable if you wouldn't mind sharing which approach you've taken if you've actually started this process. And I'm actually most interested in hearing from those who invested in a prepaid tuition plan, if they're running into issues with funding their kiddos' education where maybe they didn't go to the in-state public school. And I think they were all the rage 2-3 decades ago, but not so much anymore. That's all for today, though. If you have further questions, drop them in the comments. Get in touch on the website. We'll help you get squared away. Have an awesome rest of your day. We'll talk to you later. Bye.